What's up, everybody? I'm so happy you're here with me tonight. Today is June 20th, 2026. We have a great show in store for you today. Do you guys like the new lighting? I think it looks better. I've been trying to improve things around here. We have so much to catch up on. Oh my God. Has it really been a month? Jeez. What a month it has been. I will tell you that. As many of you know, I just got back from filming a big production in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to tell you all about it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It's been, like I said, it's been crazy. I got to hang out with some of the most powerful people in the United States government. It's kind of crazy. Also got to hang out with some very questionable people with some curious motives or motivations. Still trying to figure out some of them. We received threats. We had to shoot at an undisclosed location. We had to anonymize some of our interviewees with silhouettes because of obvious security reasons, and some of these whistleblowers were fearing for their lives. And so it was very fascinating to be around these people, the really good and noble patriots, and then some people who we were concerned about. And the entire production faced many challenges, right? They tried to threaten us or warn us, and we refused to bend. Basically, we got the footage that we sought to get. We accomplished our mission. We refused to be intimidated. And, you know, I think by this time next year, this film will grab at least America's attention, possibly, you know, beyond. It's going to push the needle, I believe, and you will see why we had to go to great lengths to maintain OPSEC, operational security, on this mission. I'm very excited to begin editing on this massive project, and I will divulge more information as time goes on. I can't really say much about it at this stage. But it's been an interesting month, and it's so good to be back. I'm so happy to be here with you. Oh, and by the way, I'm so sorry. Let's address the elephant in the room. I thought about maybe putting like a Band-Aid over this, and then I was like, actually, that's probably distracting, and it's not even that bad. But I over-rotated a double front flip on a trampoline, and you know what happens when you get road burn. I got trampoline burn. So, but no pain, just a minor flesh wound. I can't afford to mess up this moneymaker here. So you guys are going to have to deal with this for the remainder of the show. Oh boy. All right. We have so much to get into, and I'm going to catch you guys up on a lot of things before we really dig into today's material. There's a lot of updates and housekeeping, but for now, I encourage you to head over to... Oh wait, I don't think I have it set up yet. Bear with me. Do I? I don't know how to set it up with... Oh yes, I do. Okay, bear with me. Bear with me, I'm just getting the screen ready. Nope, that didn't do it. Come on. Why isn't it working? All right, let's try to do it. Oh, it is there. Okay. For some reason, it wasn't even showing me in the preview. All right. Sorry, guys. Head over to dauntlessdialogue.com. We are a media company. We are a for-profit enterprise. We rely on subscriptions from people like you. I hope to persuade you today, if you're not already a member. We do original documentaries, some of them, many of them feature length. We also do docu-series. We do animated series, short films. We also curate third-party content. And so if you browse our website, you'll find a familiar Netflixy type of layout, and that's intentional. We want to present all of our content in the manner I think that will do it justice. And our new website, I say new, it's a few months old. If you ever come across any bugs, just let us know. It's still rather new. And we have so much analytic driven content. So when you come across things that like this, top 10 most popular for the free Dauntless Originals, this is literally driven by viewership. And so Darkness by Design Part 1, Balenciaga, right now is most popular on our website. I think this is so cool that you actually get to see what the community is interested in. If you're not a member, please consider becoming one today. We have 3 plans for you to choose from. You can choose the basic plan for $9 a month, the value plan, which will save you about 2 months worth of money, and then the gold pass. This is our lifetime membership, and this is for our serious and loyal fans. And thank you to everyone who has supported us by purchasing a gold pass. We are going to cap it at the first 100, and there's still room, so get in there. And this helps us grow. This helps us tremendously. You can also support us, as you know, by clicking on shop, and we've got tons of Dauntless merch for you to check out. So please do that if you haven't. I want to just mention we have a brand new film dropping tomorrow, I imagine. I can't see it waiting until Wednesday. I've already reviewed it, and it's just, the final version is awesome. Simon Essler is an individual. We've had him on the show like half a dozen times. We've collaborated together for a number of films and series. He's a very talented, intellectual guy from Canada. He brings to the table his own interests and style of editing and does it in a very articulate and erudite way. We're thrilled to work with Simon. He's awesome. He's a good dear friend of mine. And he produced for us many years ago, when Dauntless first began, one episode of a series called You Are Here. At the time in Simon's life, some things shifted tremendously, and he just said to me, look, Adam, I'm so sorry. I know I've only done this one episode. Based on the way things are right now, I can't continue doing this. I said, look, man, it's all good. You know, life happens. You know, I'm always disappointed when there's interest in a new series and we get the momentum going and we have to pause it. But I understand life happens, right? So a few months ago, I decided to reach out to Simon and say, look, would you ever consider revamping this series, like relaunching it, basically redoing it and pursuing it? Because I love the idea behind it. And he was on board with it. He's like, this is actually awesome timing right now because I've done all this new research which plugs into this. So he reshot the first episode, re-edited it from scratch, fortified it with all this new information. And just like how they did Lord of the Rings, like they had number 2 and 3 in production simultaneously so that they were able to kind of release them very quickly. We've done the same thing with this. So he's going to have episode 2 out in a rather short order, but tomorrow I believe episode 1 should be dropping, so members have that to look forward to. I think it's about 35 minutes, and each episode is going to be around that length. It's juicy material. If you guys are idea driven, Simon's research is very idea heavy. He cites his sources and pulls in a lot of evidence to make really robust arguments. And so very excited for that. The first episode is called Cognitive Warfare. I can't wait for you to see it. And if you're not a member, yet one more reason to consider becoming a member. A quick word on the Epstein files. This was the series that we teased over the past few months from Jason Burmis. Now, Jason Burmis is a legend in this space. He's a filmmaker who's done Loose Change, Shade the Motion Picture, Invisible Empire, New World Order Defined, and Fabled Enemies. He's a friend of mine, and I was really looking forward to this series. I have to be just totally blunt with you guys. I don't know where the series stands today, and it pains me to tell you this. Jason has had just so many setbacks in his own life. He became very ill last month, and it just seems like there's so many setbacks whenever we talk about like getting this first episode out. And so, look, I want to be punctual with our releases. I want to be quick. We're obviously a slower production schedule as a company, and we don't pump out content every day or every week. We put a lot of effort and a lot of resources, time and money and effort into our research and editing. We try to bring you the best of the best, and we're trying to always level up. That being said, I just don't know where this series is, where it's at. What I've seen so far is good, but seems like Jason just has a number of setbacks. And so I just want to be transparent about that so you guys aren't, if you're upset, just understand that there's things, behind the scenes and out of my control. And when I put the trailers out and when we announce things, I'm doing so based on the information that I'm given. And then when things change, it's just beyond my control. It is what it is. And I'm doing the best I can to run Dauntless in the best possible way. Believe me, but when you're a team and you're collaborating, you know how it is, right? You're depending on other people to do what they need to do. So, Cognitive Warfare, episode 1 of You Are Here, probably tomorrow, Wednesday, I think at the latest, but I think tomorrow. And with Jason's series, I will keep you posted, of course. So that's it for my announcements. Now, I'm very excited. Let me just briefly kind of introduce today's subject matter because okay. Yeah, so as you guys know, for the past 4 or 5 months, we've been doing these incredible lectures on a variety of subjects, mainly focused towards health. That's what I study 24/7. And today's conversation, I think, will challenge you to look at things in a brand new light when it comes to chronic disease. And I don't think you'll ever look at chronic disease manifestation the same way again after we go through today's material. There are going to be tie-ins to other lectures that we've done on this channel, so I'm going to mention those so that we don't have to kind of repeat too much today. I'm going to tell you where you can find more information, but I'm also trying to make these lectures not quite as long, primarily for you to get the information that you need, but also if this does a number on my throat. When I'm talking for 2.5 hours, I find that my throat hurts even into the next day. I don't know how people do it. I guess I'm just not built for that. So I'm going to try to keep these a bit more brief. Today, we're going to talk about the current medical paradigm of siloed disease etiology and treatment, and how it focuses on symptom management and not root causes. We're going to talk about who Dr. Dean Ornish is, why he's one of my heroes, why he's one of the greats, the legends in the field of nutrition research, and why you should take him seriously. Then we're going to talk about how he's been instrumental in creating the entire field of lifestyle medicine. We're also going to talk about his unifying theory of chronic disease and why it's a paradigmatic shift for nutrition and the medical industry. We're going to talk about what are the shared etiological mechanisms that all humans have in common. Then we're going to talk about specific examples of foods that either negatively or positively modulate each of these pathways. We're going to talk about the value of explanatory power when it comes to a hypothesis proposed in any scientific field. We're going to go through decades of mechanistic, preclinical, and clinical evidence fortifying Dr. Dean Ornish's hypothesis. Why do people develop different chronic diseases if we all share the same underlying pathways? Why there are strong pushbacks to this idea? Implications and the broader impact if this is true. We're going to talk about what is Dr. Dean Ornish's protocol for maximal health and longevity. What are the epigenetic findings from his work? How this hypothesis relates to our last show, where we talked about T. Colin Campbell's critiques of reductionism in favor of holism. And we're going to ask the questions at the end. Is it possible to live disease-free for your entire life? You ever think about that? And what is meant by death by natural causes? And the answers to those questions, I think, will surprise you. If you like this kind of content, smash the like button, share the show with your friends. This is how we reach new people. Drop some questions in the chat. I'll keep my eyes on it. I love you guys for hanging out with me tonight. This is going to be a fun discussion, and let's dive in, shall we? Beginning with the current conventional medical paradigm. I don't know if you guys know this, but we are just one walk for the cure away from curing all diseases. Yes, that's right. Walk for the cure for cancer. Walk for the cure for diabetes. Walk for the cure for ALS. If you participate in these, I love you. Your heart is in the right place, but it's retarded. If you are helping to raise money for these pharmaceutical companies, which are going to develop drugs on taxpayer dollars anyway, and then sell them at ridiculous prices, and these drugs are geared at symptom treatment and not underlying root causes or any kind of preventative lifestyle or dietary shift. It's just to turn you into a cash cow, a lifelong customer for treatment. And you think that if you walk to raise some money for them, that you're doing a good thing. You're not. I'm sorry. Sorry to be so blunt about it. I personally have never participated in these. I remember back in grade school and high school, I was asked to walk for the cure. And I would just respond to them like, this seems to be wasting time. And surely by now, with the $1 trillion+ that these big pharma giants have raised, we should have everything solved. Oh, but the body's complex and it's going to take a lot more research and R&D. No. We have the answers. We have decades upon decades of research that backs up simple dietary lifestyle interventions can actually get you on the path of health, prevent, slow, stop, or reverse the progression of all major chronic diseases, extend your lifespan, improve your health span, and get you away from drugs and surgery. Of course, the current conventional medical paradigm is about making money off of treatment. And if you look at the amount of time doctors spend in their training on nutrition, it's very revealing. The average physician receives 4 hours of nutrition training. That is abysmal. The average cardiology fellow receives 0 training in 4 years of fellowship. And our hospitals are overwhelmed. Our healthcare costs are continuing to skyrocket year over year. The amount of drugs on the market expands every year. Drugs and surgery are reactive, rarely proactive. It's about symptom management. It's about getting you hooked on one medication, which will, let's be honest, let's just be blunt about it. It's going to mask a symptom, or it's going to cause a side effect somewhere else in the body. You ever notice how they use that phrase side effect as if it diminishes the significance of that damage it does in your body? It's just a side effect. It's like a hypnotic, talismanic phrase, just a side effect. But you actually have side effects that are worse than the condition that the drug is intended to treat in many cases. You take an asthma med. Maybe I should avoid actually naming specific drugs in this episode so I don't get sued. But you can see the side effect lists for yourself. You take an allergy med and it comes with suicidal ideation and stroke and diarrhea. It's really, I'll take the itchy runny nose. Thank you. Comorbidities, which are diseases that are concurrent in the body. They develop alongside one another. These are seen as, I guess, anomalous, and they're ignored at the root level. And if you do have comorbidities, they'll get you on different drugs for each disease, for each set of symptoms, right? It's one specific drug or a cocktail of drugs for each of those symptoms and diseases. There should just be a general wellness thing that gets you better, which we'll get into. There are very simple lifestyle and dietary interventions that hit on all of these different symptoms, but that's not possible in today's current medical paradigm. And this all leaves patients and indeed humans feeling powerless. Genes are my destiny. A predisposition can empower you, and you go, okay, I might have, ApoE4, which will put me at a much higher risk of Alzheimer's, but I can take a number of actions, I guess, in my life that can, in fact, lower my overall chance of developing Alzheimer's and set myself up for a much better situation in the long run. So getting that genetic predisposition, in fact, can put you at a lower risk compared to the general population. It's kind of crazy. But that implies, or that assumes, that you are actually being proactive and taking specific measures into your own hands rather than just outsourcing to your doctor or your GP. All right. So, and I want to just reference something. You guys know I love this book, The Future of Nutrition by T. Colin Campbell. We talked about him extensively in the last episode we did. Yeah, the last one that we did on supplements. And I love this book. Highly recommend it. All right, so I just want to read this little excerpt here because I think it shows how nutrition is overlooked, it's secondary, it's tertiary, it's dismissed, downplayed, basically ignored by our current medical establishment. As we said, the average physician receives 4 hours of nutrition training. Nutrition is virtually untaught in medical school. Of the approximately 130 medical specialties recognized in the United States, nutrition is not one of them. It is nearly impossible for physicians to receive reimbursement for nutrition counseling, despite an impressive combination of international epidemiological studies and laboratory studies that have indicated a potential role for nutrition in treating cancer. Nutritional therapy continues to be neglected as a treatment protocol or even as a possibility. The most recent estimate for total NIH investment in nutrition research is $1.9 billion in 2020 to be spent on 4,500 individual research grants, slightly more than 1% of the agency's total budget. I am familiar with the claim that additional nutrition research funding occurs in the specific disease categories of the NIH, but to the extent that this may be nominally true, the money for investigations involving specific nutrients as pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, and non-nutrient pill and procedure remedies. Let's put this in perspective. A rough but very conservative estimate for annual pharmaceutical R&D is $71.4 billion, almost 40 times greater. This estimate is also substantially below the industry's estimate, while the $1.9 billion attributed to nutrition includes a great deal of research not directed towards fundamental investigations of nutritional function, and certainly not toward investigations of holistic nutrition. Given this, it would be easy to suggest a ratio closer to 100 to 1. But again, nutrition professionals are not exempt from blame for this exclusion and underappreciation. In our commitment to reductionism, we in the field of nutrition have zoomed in so far that we can no longer see our own value. We should not be surprised that no one else can either. Powerful words from a guy who has spent his entire career, nearly his entire life, in the field of nutrition. And now we're going to talk about Dr. Dean Ornish, another legend in the field, and why he's a personal hero of mine, and why, before we dive into his hypothesis with any granularity, I want to just introduce you to him. In fact, I should probably even just bring up a picture, because sometimes it's nice to just see who we're talking about, so you can put a face to a name. Let's see. There's a few different pictures here. I want to get a good one of him with his beautiful bride. There's Dr. Dean Ornish and his wife Anne. She's also involved in his work. She has narrated his book. By the way, guys, this book is going to provide most of the background for today's discussion. It's called Undo It by Dean and Anne Ornish: How Simple Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases. And it's a national bestseller. It's a great book, and I don't have a hard copy. I listened to the audiobook, so unfortunately I can't just pull it out here and read stuff to you, although I definitely am going to invest in it at some point. And so that's who we're talking about, Dr. Dean Ornish. He was the very first person to demonstrate reversal of coronary heart disease in a landmark randomized controlled trial in 1998, which showed 400% improvement in coronary blood measured by cardiac PET scans after 5 years, called the Intensive Lifestyle Changes for Reversal of Coronary Heart Disease. And here it is for you guys if you want to check it out. Published in the Journal of American Medical Association. And You can search for it, intensive lifestyle changes for reversal of coronary heart disease. This was the landmark one. It was supposed to go for just 1 year, and then they eventually got, I think, further NIH funding to extend it to 5 years. And the findings were astonishing. They used technologies such as magnetic resonance imaging, MRI scans, cardiac positron emission tomography or PET scans, quantitative coronary arteriography, and radionuclide ventriculography. Let's try that one more time. Radionuclide ventriculography. So this is the real deal. They're basically looking inside of these people's arteries and looking at the diameter of blood flow. And they were also the first to, They were the first in another landmark trial to demonstrate the reversal of Alzheimer's disease through diet, and this was in 2024. Effects of intensive lifestyle changes on the progression of mild cognitive impairment or early dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, a randomized controlled clinical trial. Published in Alzheimer's Research and Therapy. And the implications are huge. After 20 weeks, that's quite rapid. And in addition to those 2 landmark studies, he founded the Preventive Medicine Research Institute, a nonprofit. Again, I told you he was instrumental in creating the field of lifestyle medicine. And going back decades, there's a panel from U.S. News and World Report that rates hospitals and clinics and medical schools, universities, sports clinics. And starting in 2011, they began to rate diets based on outcomes. And since the very beginning, so now I believe 15 years, they have ranked the Ornish diet as number 1 for heart health. So 15 years running, ranked as number 1. And in his clinic, he's shown that you can slow, stop, or reverse the progression of coronary heart disease, early stage prostate cancer, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune diseases, hyperlipidemia, obesity, Alzheimer's. You can change gene expression in up to 500 different genes in the body, possibly more. You can lengthen telomeres, basically reversing aging at the cellular level. This is incredible stuff. And you could imagine why this guy has largely been ignored by most of the field. Now, he's a juggernaut in the field. He's respected by his peers. He's respected amongst all nutrition researchers. However, this guy isn't being, trotted out on mainstream media to tell you how you can obviate and reverse all of these diseases. That's not going to happen, right? Who pays for the advertising on news media? Pfizer, Merck, these big multinational pharmaceutical companies in large part. So as I mentioned, this is the same diet, the same protocol, the same lifestyle interventions for all of those chronic diseases. Not a different pill, a different medication. It's a shame that we call it medication, Medicine is the root word. It should make you better, but medications often don't. They mask symptoms. That's a very different thing. Getting your awareness away from something or reducing the downstream effects of the underlying problem is very different than making it better. Your body wants to heal. I should just mention, your body, look, right? We talked about this at the beginning. Hopefully a week from now, you won't, at next week's episode, you won't be able to see this anymore. For those of you that missed my explanation at the beginning, I over-rotated a double front flip on a trampoline, which is never good. And the body wants to heal. Now, if you're progressively getting worse, then you're doing something wrong or not good enough. We accept that the body can heal broken bone. That's incredible. They've even, now there's breakthrough trials where they're actually showing that I think in the future we'll have the capacity to regrow limbs. That's astonishing. I mean, if you think about the body as a repairing, a self-healing, regenerative organism, then why would chronic disease progress? Clearly, you're doing something wrong or inadequately. And we're going to get into now Dr. Dean Ornish's unifying hypothesis. Now, in the title of this video, I believe I called it the unifying theory. And I just want to, spell out the difference, right? A theory is what has been tried and tested and verified and rigorously repeated, and accepted sort of universally. Now, Dr. Dean Ornish refers to his own hypothesis as a theory. That's why I titled it as such. But it's hard. It's hard to say definitively one way or the other. To be more conservative, to be more restrained journalistically, I'm going to refer to it in this video as a hypothesis. I don't want to, overstate anything. But he is so convinced. He refers to it as his unifying theory of chronic disease etiology. And so, as we mentioned, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, obesity, depression, hypercholesterolemia, early stage prostate cancer, Alzheimer's, and so much more. These are diverse manifestations of the same underlying condition. And the condition is a lack of homeostasis in some way based on a finite amount of underlying root mechanisms. Certainly, we might discover more as time goes on, but we have a pretty good list to start with and to discuss today. We're going to get into that in just a second. But basically, these are universal biological mechanisms in the body in every human being, unless, you've had like a specific thing surgically removed, but essentially in all normal human beings, as who have morphologically developed properly, we all have the same underlying root mechanisms. And when I extrapolate on these, you're going to see that this isn't something that's unique to the Inuit or unique to Europeans. This is across all different ethnicities, and that's really the root of this hypothesis. The root is that there are root conditions or mechanisms, and this turns the conventional paradigm upside down. As we said at the beginning, looking at everything as a siloed disease or set of symptoms is reductive. It's atomistic in a sense. It's like it views the body as separate parts. Yeah, there are different body parts, but they're all part of the same system. And yes, there are different systems, but they're all part of the same organism. And so we'll dive into it. You'll see exactly what I mean. And this will explain comorbidities, whereas conventional current medicine does not. They shrug their shoulders and they're like, I guess you did a few things wrong, or your genes, you were dealt a bad hand. And so this puts you back in the driver's seat, right? This means that diet and lifestyle are the master regulator, for lack of a better word, and that your daily choices can turn on or off certain processes in your body for better or worse, right? Okay, so first we're going to go through the list and we're just going to explain each of them, but then we're going to go back through the list a second time and we're going to talk about each one and how specific foods or ingredients, if you will, can dysregulate them or regulate them, depending on how you look at it. So first we have chronic inflammation and immune dysfunction. By the way, a lot of these are related. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. This reminds me, actually, before we go further, let me just quickly say, this reminds me of the conversation that we did on longevity. We talked about the 12, or now I believe it's 13, hallmarks of aging. These are the 13 pathways by which the human body ages, right? Between each of those 13 pathways of aging, there's so much overlap. This is the same sort of principle. By eating specific foods, you're causing multiple 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these different aging pathways to dysregulate simultaneously. And so, this is the same kind of concept. And I would even just say that this is ultimately, we're talking all about the same thing. Like, yes, I title these talks differently, but ultimately, if specific foods are causing a cascade effect with a number of different aging pathways, but also chronic disease pathways, you guys should put 2 and 2 together. You're eating something that the body doesn't appreciate and doesn't thrive on. So back to the list. We're going to go back to the beginning. Chronic inflammation, that's as opposed to acute inflammation. Chronic, daily, sustained inflammation. And immune dysfunction. Oxidative stress, again, chronic oxidative stress, as opposed to like a hormetic stressor, a hormetic oxidative hit, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which I'm a big fan of. I'm a practicer. I am an enthusiast of HBOT, and yes, that's oxidative stress, but it's an acute hit which acts as a hormetic stressor. So a lot of these are just chronic. They become an issue when they're chronic. Cellular metabolism and apoptosis. Apoptosis is cellular suicide, basically, and this can become a problem when it becomes dysregulated. Same thing with cellular metabolism. That's obviously good. You want proper cellular metabolism. When it becomes dysregulated, that's when it becomes a problem. Dysbiosis is microbiome imbalance, and that has downstream effects for metabolites and hormones and neurotransmission. Also, TMAO production, which occurs in your gut. You've got basically like 100 trillion microbes in your GI lining your epithelial, and if you're feeding them things that they don't thrive on, then you're not going to thrive. Mitochondrial dysfunction. We've talked, I think, quite a bit on this channel about mitochondria, specifically I think we talked about it in the probiotics episode, but also in the cold therapy, the cryotherapy episode. Sympathetic overdrive and chronic stress. So you have your parasympathetic, which is like rest, restore, heal. And then you have sympathetic, which is fight or flight. That's your anxiety. That's where cortisol becomes an issue. Everyone has a natural circadian cortisol rhythm, but chronic cortisol is an issue. It's one of the most acidic hormones in the body. I think it is the most acidic, if I'm not mistaken. Changes to your gene expression and sirtuin activity. These are big, right? Because your genome is you. It's your code. And so if you have changes to that as a result of mutagens are things that harm your DNA. But you also have epigenetic changes. Diet, lifestyle, mood can all affect your gene expression. And we're talking about hundreds of genes, potentially thousands. I think as time goes by over the next 10 years, we're going to have thousands of genes identified that are regulated through diet and lifestyle. Remember, I think the Human Genome Project mapped 20,000 human genes, if I'm not mistaken. So the ability to affect at least 500 is huge. Telomere attrition, which means like shortening. Your telomeres are the caps on the ends of your chromosomes. They're going to protect your DNA. And if they shorten over time, which they pretty much do for everybody, as you age, you tend to see telomere attrition, but you can take certain interventions which will restore length to those telomeres, basically putting a stronger helmet on your DNA. Dysregulated angiogenesis and blood flow issues. So angiogenesis is the formation of new blood cells. Just like we were talking about a moment ago with inflammation or oxidative stress, this only becomes an issue when it's pathological or dysregulated. Angiogenesis can be awesome. It can be great for your body. In fact, we mentioned hyperbaric oxygen therapy a moment ago, and it plays a big role in angiogenesis. Your body has a chemical called VEGF, VEGF. VEGF is like the train tracks for laying down new blood vessels. And unfortunately, when this becomes pathological, guess what else produces VEGF? Cancer cells or tumors. They want healthy blood flow to feed them, just like your cells do as well. And so that's problematic if you have angiogenesis feeding cancer cells or autoimmune conditions or eye disease or cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, obesity, endometriosis, certain liver diseases, even certain aspects of Alzheimer's disease or multiple sclerosis. This is where dysregulated or pathological angiogenesis becomes an issue. And so proper angiogenesis feeds healthy blood flow to you. Dysregulated feeds it to chronic disease. And lack of sleep is another one. And stasis. And stasis, as the name implies, you have a lack of flow in your body. Now, this could be blood flow. It could be flowing through, like peristalsis, like through your metabolism, other fluids. And so stasis is an issue. Just like in nature, there's some exceptions to what I'm about to say, but I think it'll illustrate my point. In nature, where you find a lack of flow, like in a pond that doesn't have a stream feeding into it, you're going to find much less life in there. You're going to find very specific things that can thrive in that environment, but for the most part, you need oxygenation and blood flow, water flow, right? Flowing nutrients to feed that pond or that lake. So yeah, those are the main pathways. As I've said before, we will likely discover many more. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg. There are certainly other nuances that we could cover here, but I want to hit on the big ones because otherwise this presentation would be unending. So as we've mentioned, and as Dr. Dean Ornish's hypothesis posits, each of these is regulated or dysregulated via simple diet and lifestyle interventions very quickly over the course of weeks or months. And now we're going to go back through the list. We're going to talk about specific foods or ingredients that are well established in the literature to contribute to dysfunction and lead you down, I'm going to use the word pathway, right? Lead you down a bad path via these underlying chronic disease pathways. So let's start with chronic inflammation and immune dysfunction. You have red and processed meats. These are the big ones. So beef, bacon, sausages, very high in saturated fats. Heme iron. Heme iron is going to come up again for oxidative stress. It is a pro-oxidant. You've heard of antioxidants being extremely beneficial, while pro-oxidants are the opposite, of course. And you have advanced glycation end products, also known by the acronym AGEs, which, as the acronym implies, ages you faster. And they promote cytokine release like IL-6 and TNF-alpha. Also for chronic inflammation and immune dysregulation, you have refined sugars and high fructose corn syrup. Think sodas, candy, baked goods. These drive glycation, insulin spikes, and NLRP3, inflammasome activation. You have trans fats and excessive omega-6 oils. There's a lot of fear and hysteria right now around seed oils and refined oils. I will do an entire show in the future about that. I have much to say on the topic, as you can imagine. But really, one of the biggest issues is just going to be the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So that's why excessive omega-6 oils are listed here. So fried foods, margarine, a lot of processed snacks. They shift eicosanoid balance toward pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. You have ultra-processed foods, so chips, fast food, candy, often contain emulsifiers and additives that disrupt your gut barrier function. Now for the next pathway, oxidative stress, and we'll talk about cellular metabolism and apoptosis. So fried and charred foods, grilled meats, French fries. French fries are also high in French fries, potato chips, any kind of fried potato is going to be high in, starts with an A. Acrylamide, which is carcinogenic. These are high in advanced glycation end products and lipid oxidation end products, or ALEs, heterocyclic amines, and generate reactive oxygen species, meaning they're pro-oxidant. Refined carbohydrates and sugars. This is going to cause glycemic spikes, leading to mitochondrial reactive oxygen species overproduction. Alcohol, as you guys may or may not know, alcohol, ethanol specifically, which is the type that we drink, is a group 1 carcinogen. I've talked about this on the show in the past. So group 1 does not necessarily mean it's the most carcinogenic. It just means that we have the most evidence that it's carcinogenic. We can say with certainty that it's carcinogenic if it's a group 1. And so if you're drinking alcohol, you might like to have a good time and loosen up and everything, but it's coming at a carcinogenic price. Alcohol gets metabolized into acetaldehyde, which induces oxidative damage and impairs cellular metabolism. And again, high omega-6 vegetable oils, these promote lipid peroxidation when they're not balanced with omega-3s. Now on to the next pathway, dysbiosis, which is a microbiome imbalance. And we mentioned TMAO, or trimethylamine N-oxide, red meat, egg yolks, organ meats, rich in choline and carnitine. So your gut bacteria converts them to TMA, which becomes TMO which is linked to cardiovascular disease, among many other things. And if you want more information on TMAO because you just don't believe me, there's a great article or a great page on nutritionfacts.org you can check out, and you can see the host of different conditions that it's linked to. Again, dysbiosis would be low fiber or high animal protein diets, which are going to reduce beneficial bacteria like bifidobacterium, lactobacillus, while favoring proteolytic bacteria. Artificial sweeteners and emulsifiers, like in many ultra-processed foods, these are going to alter the microbiome composition and potentially impinge on your gut barrier integrity. Alcohol and high sugar foods are going to promote pathogenic overgrowth like Candida albicans and reduce overall diversity. The next pathway is mitochondrial dysfunction. So high sugar, high fructose diets, these are going to overload your mitochondria, leading to electron leak and reactive oxygen species. Processed meats and charred foods, again, contain compounds that impair mitochondrial respiration. Chronic high fat, especially saturated or trans fat intake, is obesogenic in certain contexts and promotes lipid overload and inefficient energy production. And we've talked about that a lot in our Stop Obsessing About Protein episode. Alcohol, directly toxic to mitochondria via acetaldehyde and oxidative stress. Are you starting to see the pattern? We're only like halfway through our list of pathways, and we've touched on so many of these repeatedly. So for sympathetic nervous system overdrive and chronic stress, emotional stress, mental stress, actually caffeine in excess stimulates adrenaline and norepinephrine release. If you're going to do caffeine, get it in before noon. It has a pretty long half-life. Everyone has a slightly different caffeine half-life, but I think everyone should stop drinking caffeine by noon. That's pretty obvious. High sugar and refined carb meals. These are going to cause blood sugar crashes. Everybody knows that. It's going to trigger your stress hormones. So always go for low glycemic or no sugar added, ideally. That's what we try to do in this house. Ultra-processed foods with additives may indirectly heighten stress via inflammation and poor sleep. And then alcohol, specifically like binging patterns, disrupts autonomic balance. On to the next pathway, gene expression changes and sirtuin activity, including oncogenes. So starting with that, you have high calorie, nutrient poor diets. Going to down-regulate sirtuins like SIRT1 via NAD plus depletion. Excessive alcohol and sugars are going to impair sirtuin function and epigenetic regulation. By the way, I should have mentioned at the top, sirtuins are linked with longevity. So if you're impairing their function, you're effectively shortening your lifespan. Processed meats, particularly with preservatives, are going to be associated with epigenetic changes favoring oncogene expression, which could feed cancer. Low polyphenol intake, common in a lot of Western diets, lacking compounds from plants called phytochemicals or phytonutrients that are going to activate your sirtuins. Next pathway is telomere attrition. Again, processed meats and high saturated fat diets linked to shorter telomeres via oxidative stress and inflammation. High sugar and refined carbs are going to promote glycation and oxidative stress and damage telomeres. Alcohol is going to accelerate the shortening of telomeres through oxidative mechanisms. And then low antioxidants and low plant intake is going to reduce protective nutrients like vitamin C and E and polyphenols and, all of the pigments that are found in plants, particularly in fruit. And so the average, so when you put animal foods side by side with plant foods, and they've done this with these master databases containing tens of thousands of different food items, they show that actually plants contain on average 64 times the amount of antioxidants as their animal-based counterparts. Next pathway is going to be dysregulated or pathological angiogenesis. Like we talked about earlier, the dysregulated creation of new blood vessels. So high red and processed meat intake can promote VEGF in certain contexts via TMAO and inflammation. Obesogenic diets that are high in sugars and fats, the American Western diet, going to drive adipose tissue, angiogenesis, and systemic effects. And then trans fats and oxidized oils contribute to endothelial dysfunction and abnormal blood vessel growth. Next pathway is chronic oxidative stress. Oh, sorry, we did that one. Lack of sleep. I don't know why I had that one twice. Lack of sleep. So just different dietary contributions from caffeine, like we mentioned earlier, late in the day. There's nothing wrong with caffeine. It's just time of day matters. Energy drinks, of course, chocolate. These are all things that are going to drive your caffeine intake or theobromine intake. Adenosine receptor blockade. I actually don't know what that one means. I'm going to have to research that myself. High sugar and refined carbs in evening meals. So your blood sugar is going to fluctuate, which could disrupt your melatonin production. Your melatonin is your sleep hormone. Alcohol, particularly late at night, can really disrupt your sleep cycle. Even if you're asleep, you might not be getting deep restorative sleep. So somebody might say, well, alcohol helps me sleep late at night, or marijuana helps me sleep late at night. And it's like, well, when you look at the literature, you actually show that you are not getting as deep and rejuvenating sleep as you could be without. Just because you're unconscious doesn't mean you're getting the best night's sleep. And then this one might be a curveball. Heavy and spicy meals close to bedtime can promote, reflux and sympathetic activation, which can really disrupt your sleep. And then the last pathway here that we're talking about today is stasis. Again, this is going to be lack of flow in the body. Could be blood flow, bowel, just overall. So low fiber diets, low in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, beans, going to slow gut motility, leading to constipation. High processed and low hydration diets Obviously, dehydration can lead to sluggish circulation. High animal fat and low plant diets, they're going to alter bile flow and your microbiome, indirectly affecting motility. And conversely, after everything we've just said, whole plant foods, particularly rich in fiber and polyphenols and balanced omega-3s, like ALA, alpha linolenic acid, these are going to actually modulate these pathways for the better. They're going to counteract the effects of all of the foods we just listed. And so to kind of summarize, you have 4 diet and lifestyle interventions that are going to target all of these pathways. 4, not 100 or 1,000 different medications, 4 simple things. And this is what Dr. Dean Ornish advocates in his book, Undo It. For those who are just joining us, we showed this a little bit earlier. This is where we're drawing a lot of the information for this presentation from. Dr. Dean Ornish, and also narrated by Ann Ornish, his wife. Undo It, How Simple Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases. And so he advocates for 4 simple diet and lifestyle factors: moderate exercise and strength training, stress management practices like meditation or yoga, nurturing psychosocial connections, including love and intimacy, and a whole food, plant-based diet naturally low in harmful fats like saturated and trans fats, low in animal protein, low in sugar, and refined carbohydrates. That's why whole food is important. Not just plant-based, but whole food plant-based. This is, I think, captured by his advice: eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And he starts his book with a quote by Einstein that if you can't explain something simply, then you don't really understand it. And so boiling it down to those 4 simple pieces of advice, I think, shows that you have someone who understands the body and understands what it needs and can break it down so easily that even a 5-year-old could understand. Now, we've talked about his unifying hypothesis for chronic disease formation. And I think it's important now to back it up. Obviously, we just showed how there are certain foods that dysregulate those pathways. But it's also important when we're talking about any proposed scientific hypothesis to discuss the value of explanatory power. And we're going to get into, well, let me hold that thought for a moment. It's important to point out that, again, in the current conventional medical paradigm, they can't explain things like comorbidities that well. They sort of shrug and they say, well, you probably did a lot of things wrong, and that's why you developed this disease and this disease and this disease concurrently. But then you pull back and you look at the population level and you go, no, these are comorbidities that are almost always seen together. If you have one diagnosis, oftentimes you have another one of these diseases coming up. It's forming, right? If you have coronary heart disease, you probably are pre-diabetic, and maybe that's just undiagnosed or it's not fully fledged yet. If you have high cholesterol, you probably have high blood pressure, and you're probably on your way to heart disease. And you might even also be obese, and you might even be in the early stages of Alzheimer's, which often gets diagnosed late but takes many decades to form or develop. So comorbidities is a big puzzle piece of this hypothesis. And it's when you change the lens of perception that you start to see chronic disease not as disparate, siloed diseases. This disease is independent of this one and this one and this one. In fact, they're all sort of manifestations of the same underlying pathological or dysregulated mechanisms in the body that we all have in common. And when you get into this, they call it pathophysiology. When you're trying to use a variety of tools to sort of triangulate the disease based on the symptoms. And, invariably you're going to find that most of these chronic conditions are developing simultaneously. And so before we dig into the evidence that I think really backs up Dr. Dean Ornish's hypothesis, I want to read another excerpt here. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm going to read from The Future of Nutrition by T. Colin Campbell. You've heard me quote from him before because this book is awesome. And he has this table here. I don't know if you can see it, probably not very well. New criteria for the reliability of evidence. And so he's extrapolating on a proposed set of criteria for the reliability of evidence put forward in 1965 by Sir Bradford Hill, who puts 9 criteria forward. And T. Colin Campbell is now proposing a 10th criterion for the reliability of evidence. And so I'm going to break this down for you now, and you'll see where he's going with this. So from the table, I will go down the column. You have strength. And so I'm going to read them and then I'll break them down. Strength, consistency, specificity, temporality, gradient, plausibility, coherence, experiment, and analogy. Let's break those down one at a time. So strength of data is when there exist strong associations, like a 10-fold size of effect versus a 2-fold size of effect. They are generally viewed as more reliable. Consistency, when the findings of a hypothesis by different authors and different study designs agree. Specificity, when size of effect and significance of a single causal factor is much greater than for other factors. Temporality, when the cause precedes the effect. Gradient, when the effect increases with exposure or dose. Plausibility, when a hypothetical cause can be explained mechanistically. Coherence, when the findings of a study align with other generally known facts. Experiment, when carefully designed experimental tests of a hypothesis agree. Analogy, when analogies or similarities exist between the observed cause and effect relationship and other well-accepted associations. Now, Colin Campbell is proposing criterion 10, breadth. When an association exists across divisions of age, gender, ethnicity, etc., when it exists in a broader context, it should be viewed as more reliable. And he goes on to say, breadth, that's kind of a funny word, right? It's like bread with a TH. Breadth of effect is especially important in the case of nutritional effects, which I will discuss in greater depth in Chapter 8. Breadth asks whether an intervention might be used to treat a fuller range of illness and disease. It asks whether recommendations might apply, at least in part, for everyone, regardless of age, ethnicity, and sex. And crucially, it asks whether an intervention may be capable of both treating and preventing disease. In short, this single addition makes a huge difference. Emphasizing breadth of effect results in a profound departure from current pharmacologic treatment protocols, which almost exclusively target the alleviation of individual symptoms on an illness-by-illness basis, and even on a treatment-by-treatment basis with a single illness. Again, this should not be taken as a repudiation of the original 9 criteria. No doubt, Hill's original criteria are very useful, but they also conform to a reductionist model of disease causation. By adding breadth, that is, by refocusing our attention on the whole, we correct this issue. Whereas a reductionist assessment of evidence can be misleading and even potentially dangerous, breadth is far more discerning. For example, there may be very compelling evidence indicating a certain diet's ability to promote weight loss, and that evidence could very well satisfy most of the 9 old criteria. But what if that diet also had adverse effects on other measurements of health? What if it also promoted loss of strength or loss of balance among older adults? What if it only resulted in weight loss for young women and did not have a similarly beneficial effect for older men? Obviously, we would prefer a diet whose positive effects worked across the board. So why would we not consider the evidence for an intervention in an across-the-board way too? The point I'm circling again and again is that good evidence should satisfy the principles of both reductionism and holism. Though there's an obvious value in knowing how certain mechanisms work and how certain interventions influence those mechanisms, this knowledge must also be meaningful within a broader context. If a piece of good evidence cannot help to clarify the true nature of the whole, then it doesn't matter how well it delineates a specific mechanism. If we are committed to truly useful science, then we must keep our eyes on the prize, the whole prize, and not let ourselves slip into a self-congratulatory cycle of highly specialized quests for trivia that the public can neither understand nor use. Or, to put it more mildly, we need balance. Now we're going to talk about evidence from decades of research, much of which comes from Dr. Dean Ornish himself, and other evidence. So you have his lifestyle, heart trial, and follow-ups since then, which show the reversal of coronary heart disease without drugs, without surgery, published in Lancet and JAMA. You have prostate cancer, which is slowed, stopped, reversed in early stage progression. And then you also have these spillover benefits for diabetes, hypertension, obesity, depression, hypercholesterolemia, which is high LDL, even reduced COVID severity, right? Now, as far as mechanistic proof, you have gene expression changes in 501 or more genes in 3 months. Telomerase up to 30% increase. Telomere lengthening over 5 years versus shortening in controls, and that's important. Then you have broader data like the EPIC study and Harvard Nurses Health Professional study showing massive risk of reductions from similar habits when countries shifting to Western lifestyles see explosions of disease. That's actually why we've lost all but one of the proverbial blue zones. The blue zones, I've talked about this before. I'm going to do an entire show on it at some point. The blue zones are these concentrations of extremely healthy people who live past 100 years of age. They outnumber the surrounding areas or the average by something like 10 to 1. They have so many centenarians that they were called blue zones, and now basically all of them except for one have become adapted to the Western diet through supermarket and transnational foodstuff corporation influence. And so Okinawa is no longer a blue zone. Icaria or Icaria, Greece. There's one in Italy. I talk about these all the time, but whenever I go live, it's like I can't remember the name of it. The point is, a lot of these are vanishing, and their isolation and unique diets, salubrious diets, have acquiesced to basically the Western diet. The only one that remains is Loma Linda, California, and this is the largest concentration of vegetarians and vegans anywhere in the world, and primarily for religious reasons. There are other contributing factors to their incredible health. Many of them are, they abstain from drinking and drugs, but their diet is extremely protective. And so that's that. When we talk about the EPIC studies, we're talking about 23,000 participants. They found that 3.5 hours a week of exercise, which is not that much, plus a healthy diet, plus healthy weight maintenance and not smoking, equated to a prevention of 36% of all cancers, 50% of strokes, 81% of heart attacks, and 93% of diabetes. Prevention of all cancers, strokes, heart attacks, diabetes. These are the big four killers, right? And there it is. According to, or in line with Dr. Dean Ornish's approach, a little bit of exercise, healthy diet, healthy BMI, and not smoking, you're going to have a reduction of all of these, not just one of these. Because as Dr. Dean Ornish says, a diet that's healthy for the brain is healthy for the heart, is healthy for the lungs, is healthy for the kidneys, is healthy for the liver. You don't have a different diet for each of these. And according to the Harvard Nurses and Health Professionals study, this is ongoing, but basically 78,865 nurses and 44,354 physicians. These are individuals who follow food frequency questionnaires, better adherence, and better overall understanding of what is required of them. They take it more seriously than the general population. So the reliability of the Harvard Nurses Health Professional study is incredible. I mean, it's one of the best data sets epidemiologically anywhere in the world. And it's been going on for decades. And, I think I even have it pulled up. I think I have all of these. I just keep forgetting to show them. That's my bad. Bear with me. Healthy eating patterns and risk of total and cause-specific mortality. Here we go. The health professionals follow-up study. So the most recent data, or this particular one, I should say, is from 2020. There might even be an update since then. And basically what we're talking about is those who never smoked, who had a normal BMI, moderate activity, moderate alcohol, so some alcohol but not excessive, and a high diet quality, meaning, no little to no refined carbs, little to no, I would say moderate intake of saturated fat, animal proteins, trans fats, red meat, that sort of thing, is going to result in 65% lower risk of cancer, 74% lower risk of all-cause mortality, 82% lower risk of heart disease, and they lived 12 to 14 years longer on average. Incredible. So we have these big data sets, the EPIC study and the Harvard Nurses Health Professional study. Basically, when you combine the two of them, you're looking at over 100,000 participants. You're looking at decades of data, and the data doesn't lie. So why do we get different outcomes, different manifestations of certain chronic diseases, even though we all share the same underlying biological pathways for disease manifestation? And Dr. Dean Ornish would answer this with a few things: epigenetics, dietary patterns, and age, sex, and ethnicity. So epigenetics, right? We talked about this earlier. Going to be your environment. Environment is the big catch-all word because environment is anything and everything. But basically, diet, lifestyle, mood, these are going to be the things that are going to affect your genome. And so those are going to vary from person to person. Dietary patterns are going to vary from person to person. So you might be eating something that's very, very high in sodium and lower in saturated fat, but higher in trans fat and lower in omega-6s. And then if you compare that with another person who's also doing a lot of things wrong, but not the same things wrong and not over the course of decades, everyone has their customs, their culture, their religion, their familial upbringing, their dietary preferences, and these things all will define someone's dietary pattern long term, and that's going to vary from person to person. And then, of course, your age, your sex, and your ethnicity. That doesn't mean that there's a diet that's different for everyone based on age, based on sex, based on ethnicity. But it does mean that your dietary pattern will play harder or softer on certain etiological pathways than someone else of a different age, of a different sex or ethnicity. And so obviously, like a simple one, going off of the pathways that we outlined earlier, you can take something like telomere attrition. Well, younger people have much longer telomeres. Women have longer telomeres than men. And I'm actually not sure if there's differences in between ethnicities with telomeres. But that's an easy one to point to. And so even though we all have the same underlying etiological pathways, your epigenetics, so your environment, your mood, your diet, your lifestyle, your dietary patterns, and your age, sex, and ethnicity, these are going to be the main things that are going to pull harder on specific levers over time. And you might even just have a genetic predisposition for a certain thing. So that's why we get somebody who develops cancer, and cancer runs in their family. It's like, well, so do diets. Diets often run in families. And so I'm even a bit wary, a bit less likely to attribute things to genetics as the next person, because I understand that within a family, you inherit diets as much as you inherit genes most of the time. Now, why are there strong pushbacks to this idea? Well, obviously, we have a system built on drugs and surgery, healthcare, health insurance. These are massive institutions that are self-preserving. We talked earlier at the beginning of the show about walking for the cure, when these big pharmaceutical companies, they're just investing that into specific molecular drug breakthroughs and not at preventative nutrition and lifestyle. Pharmaceutical companies can't make money if they sell you running. They can't sell you eat more oranges, you know? And so the other big reason, possibly the biggest reason that there's pushback on this idea, is that it really taps into the idea that there's a broad dietary category that's optimal for everyone. And that ruffles so many, I call them diet tribes. This ruffles the feathers of so many diet tribes because everyone's advocating for this diet or that diet. And if you say that diet's further on the spectrum towards things that are going to play on these pathways, you will get pushback because people have written a book or somebody's produced a documentary or sold you a plan, or just advocated for a specific diet or lifestyle. Maybe somebody has shilled for a specific industry. They have a conflict of interest, and that's why they're never going to look you in the face and admit that what you're saying is obviously true, that there are these 13 aging pathways and a dozen or more of these chronic disease pathways that are almost all influenced negatively by the same types of foods and beverages, or positively affected by these other foods and beverages. That's the reality. The reality is that there is a spectrum, and each diet is going to fall somewhere on that spectrum objectively. This isn't me advocating a specific way for you to eat. That's not what I'm here to do. I love you all and I care about you. I want you guys to be healthy and, live a long life with me. But your diet is your choice, and I respect that. I couldn't change your mind even if I tried. The best I can do is present evidence, make the most compelling argument that I can, and leave the choice to you. Now I want to read one last excerpt from The Future of Nutrition, T. Colin Campbell. And I think he says this best. We have, at this point, explored two important ways in which the whole food plant-based diet radically challenges the status quo. The first radical challenge is aimed at our beliefs about disease and health and our power over them. For instance, it challenges our belief that diseases are meant to be discrete in their naming, their pathology, and their management. Accordingly, we believe that given sufficient information, diseases can be technically and specifically managed. This motivates us to discover ever more discrete details on pathology and management, the purview of modern science, and encourages ever more specific, isolated solutions, both in identification of causes and refinement of treatments. This may seem fair and reasonable enough, but there is a cost. It tends to lead us astray from the concept of interconnectedness, the essence of nature. The whole food plant-based diet, the effectiveness of which is explained by the interconnectedness of nature, is therefore ignored. The evidence supporting the whole food plant-based diet challenges these and many other historically entrenched, institutionally enforced attitudes about disease and its causes, and in doing so, challenges both our understanding and approach to a wide spectrum of conventional disease treatment. The second radical change that the whole food plant-based diet poses is to the field of nutrition, which has tended toward confusion and misapplication since at least the mid-19th century. The whole food plant-based diet clarifies nutrition, collates dietary advice for the vast majority of people into two very simple instructions: consume whole foods and avoid animal foods, and empowers the individual. It is in its push for clarity, simplicity, and accessibility. It challenges nutrition's long-standing dominant patterns. Moreover, it challenges long-held nutrition science myths, especially our veneration of animal protein. By extension, it challenges ongoing debates about fat, cholesterol, and more, or rather, it simplifies these debates out of existence. We have now arrived at a third reason that the whole food plant-based diet is controversial, and this is perhaps the most radical of them all. The whole food plant-based diet and its supporting evidence radically challenge our attitudes towards science and evidence themselves. This challenge is inherent in the evidence I am speaking of in support of a whole food plant-based diet, because that evidence doesn't fit within conventional parameters. By this, I do not mean in any way that the whole food plant-based diet is supported by bad evidence. On the contrary, it is supported by a very impressive body of scientifically sound evidence. Rather, it does not fit within the bounds of what many scientists designate as the best science and the best evidence. The problem is that these designations are based on human value judgments. The science community has long favored certain kinds of evidence, certain methodologies, and certain narrow interpretations, and the evidence in favor of a whole food plant-based diet does not always cohere with these. In short, the whole food plant-based diet forces us to rethink our notions of what is good science. And that's where he circles back around to the breadth of the reliability of evidence. And so the implications and the broader impact of this hypothesis is that it radically simplifies medicine. It's one core program versus dozens of disease-specific drugs and diets. You have a root cause focus over mopping up symptoms, like you turn off the faucet. The hope for prevention and reversal in even incurable areas, like he's demonstrated in Alzheimer's. You have a societal and epidemiological implication, which means this explains why Western disease epidemics are lifestyle driven. This challenges the pharmaceutical and surgery as default in our system. This empowers the individual and independent health seekers who don't want to go down the path of relying on the system, relying on doctors. They just want to be their own doctor. And again, you don't have to look at genes as a death sentence. So once again, it's eat well, move more, stress less, love more. So whole food plant-based diets, going to be fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes. You could throw mushrooms in there. Low in harmful fats, animal protein, sugar, refined carbs, more sustainable for the planet anyway. Move more is going to be moderate exercise and strength training. You don't have to get extreme with it. Stress less, so meditation, mindfulness, yoga, breathing techniques. Just manage your emotions, practice stoicism. Love more is like social support, community, intimacy. This is going to combat isolation. And isolation has been identified epidemiologically as a risk factor for all-cause mortality, similar to, heavy metal exposure or, radon gas exposure or asbestos or PFAS, forever chemicals. Isolation for most people on the population level, you might think of some exceptions the same way you can think of exceptions to smoking causing lung cancer, but on the population level, isolation is deadly. So you have a synergy with these four protocols, these 4 pieces of advice. And when you do all 4, you will see tremendous changes in your health and ultimately in your health span and longevity. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's room for variation, and no one here is saying you must eat specific foods. It's like, do your thing. You have within this broad category 1,000 ways to eat, but there are things that you should concentrate on and things that you should try to avoid. And lifestyle too, right? Don't forget about stressing less and moving more. All right. We did a show a couple months back called Autoeugenics, Nutrigenomics, and the Biology of Belief. So if you're interested, go watch that. I go through a lot more evidence demonstrating that there are these epigenetic changes that occur when we eat specific foods, and that you can actually improve your own genome through diet and lifestyle and selective selection of your environment. And I want to finish now with my questions that I posed at the beginning of the show. Is it possible to live disease-free for your entire life? It's kind of an interesting question. Maybe you've never thought of it. Maybe you've assumed that it's obvious that you can, or that it's obvious that you can't. But we're going to look at that. And then what is meant when somebody says death by natural causes? What does that mean? Death by natural causes, death by old age. What does that actually mean? So now I'm going to show you nobody actually dies from old age. Autopsy studies reveal what really kill us. And so they did some autopsies of centenarians, individuals who've lived past 100 years old. And while at the time they were declared to have died of natural causes or old age, that the autopsies told a different story. Autopsy studies across several species reveal that specific diseases, so in humans it's usually heart disease, cancer in mice, intestinal failure in flies, are really what kills us, not some generalized aging process. Even healthy centenarians die from identifiable organ failures, never from aging alone. The hallmarks of aging may not slow aging. So between 57 to 100% of studies supporting aging's most influential framework only tested interventions in old animals. When studies included young animals, 72% of traits showed the same improvement in both groups, suggesting that these interventions boost general health rather than slow aging itself. Yeah, so it's interesting. When researchers examined 2,410 autopsies, cardiovascular disease emerged as the culprit in the vast majority of deaths, including myocardial infarction, heart attacks at 39%, cardiopulmonary failure, 38%, and cerebrovascular lesions, strokes at 17.9%. A study of people over 85 who died unexpectedly outside hospitals found cardiovascular events responsible for 77% of deaths, even among centenarians perceived as healthy. Autopsies revealed that 68% died from cardiovascular causes, 25% from respiratory failure, and smaller percentages from other specific organ failures. 0 died from old age. So what does that mean? You don't just get old and die. Your death certificate might be filled out, well, died of natural causes, died of old age. But underneath, you have the progression of chronic diseases. So would you not want to take a serious look at the common mechanisms beneath these killers, these killer diseases, heart disease being the number one killer of people on earth by gross numbers. And yeah, I would say anything that converges the data sets of the 13 hallmarks of aging and the dozen or so chronic disease pathways, there are food groups, whole plant foods, that positively modulate them through fiber content, through polyphenols and antioxidants and other phytochemicals, and just being naturally low in refined sugars and low in unhealthy fats, saturated and trans fat. And then conversely, specific foods like red and processed meats, alcohol, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, trans fat like margarine specifically, diets high in sodium. These are going to be things that are going to really degrade or dysregulate those specific chronic disease pathways. So the answers are actually quite simple. You don't have to overcomplicate medicine. You don't have to overthink diet. You don't have to blame it on your genetics. You have so much power and control in your fingertip or at your fingertips. Ellie G says in the chat, this is such an important topic. Thanks for covering it. There are so many things that can be addressed with food and natural supplements. She says that refers to doctors with traditional training with little to no nutrition. Oh, she's saying they do not get at the root cause. They have little to no nutritional training. Most medications doctors use do not address the root cause, only mask or cause the side effects you mentioned. She also says, don't oils with higher flash points allow for frying or sauteing foods without the carcinogenic effects? Yep. I also recently found a combined avocado and olive oil that helps balance the omega-6 with omega-3. Yep. We cook primarily with avocado oil that has the higher flash point, the higher smoke point. And we do use flax oil and olive oil in other recipes and contexts. LEG says, my husband's great aunt never had to take any medications until she was 101 years old, and they put her on a water pill. She lived to 106 years old when she fell and broke her hip. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. Accidents and falls are a major issue for older people, and that's because of frailty. And so osteoporosis and lack of muscle mass, lean mass are contributing factors in that case. And that's why strength training and muscle mass are inversely associated with all-cause mortality or early mortality. The more muscle mass you have going into old age, the more equipped you will be to just maintain strength and vigor and resist falls. And if you do fall, you'll be better off. And so thanks for the comments. I made a bunch of announcements at the very beginning of the show, so go back and check those out. And I even addressed the fact that, why my moneymaker is messed up. And talked about some of the upcoming film drops that we have. There should be one tomorrow, so keep your eyes on that. If you're not a member, we could certainly use your support, so please consider signing up for a basic plan, a value plan. Heck, even a gold pass would be awesome. And you can support us by shopping Rise Attire. You can find our entire merch line through Rise Attire with our awesome logo, as well as clicking on Signature Series Vibes. We have 2 collections, which is in support of or in conjunction with our Vibes series. And there's some really cool stuff here. Just click browse full collection. Also, guys, if you are worried about your private information being sold by data brokers, we have a link in the description. It's through a company called Delete Me. I wholly believe in them. I personally use them, and when they sent me the report for all of the information that was being sold about me, including, phone numbers, residences, past residences, specific family member relationships, and so much more. It's very creepy. And if you're worried about your information being bought and sold, they will get that information taken down. That greatly supports the company. That greatly supports us as a company. And you will save, I think, 20% with Delete Me. And we really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me tonight. This was an awesome conversation. I think we kept it relatively shorter, like a half hour shorter than normal. So thank goodness for that. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you that shows up and supports Dauntless and supports our mission. You guys are incredible. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you to all of our loyal subscribers who have stuck with us through thick and thin. We have incredible things in the works right now. Please stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next week. Peace out.